I lied, but it's a good kind of lie. It's the kind of lie where we actually get something good. A pleasant surprise, if you will. Yes, I couldn't stop Aliens extravaganza at Aliens on the MSX. No, I was inspired to do one more. Because let's face it, Alien Isolation actually looks like everything that Aliens Colonial Marine should have been. Now then, today we're going to be taking a look at Alien on the ZX Spectrum. Now this game was also on the Commodore 64, but I chose the Speccy for a very convoluted reason. Essentially, my grandfather got into computing by acquiring a ZX81, and it was essentially a kit that he had to construct himself. And this actually gets into some sort of a funny story, because when he was actually constructing it, he accidentally put in the processor chip upside down, causing the machine to break. I'm sure many fucks were shouted out that day. Well, not really, because he never really swears, but I'm sure the equivalent to fuck would have been shouted out with that mistake. Now, essentially, throughout my formative years, my grandfather would talk about this computer time and again, basically saying that computing as of the 90s was way more advanced than computing as of the 80s, and he would be correct, because a 3.5-inch floppy is a lot more easy to use than magnetic tape. Now, for those who don't know, magnetic tape was a fairly common storage medium throughout the 1980s, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You have a cassette tape with a computer program on it, and as my grandfather would say, it would take about, 16 years for anything to finally load up. Now, I personally have not used any old microcomputers, although I would like to rectify that at some point. In fact, if anyone wants to donate me a Speccy, I would like one. Can I have one, sir? But anyway, and so yeah, that roundabout reason is why we're taking a look at Alien on the ZX Spectrum. So with that, let's jump right in, and what the hell am I looking at? When you first boot up the game, it looks, well, like this. Not really visually appealing. In fact, I'd almost say, and no, I wouldn't even almost say, I would say, that Alien on the Atari 2600 is way more visually appealing than, well, this. Now, that's the thing. It does not look graphically appealing, but the gameplay itself is actually decent. Now, this game is vastly more complicated than pick up alien feces and try not to die. At least I assume that's what those little dots are. But anyway, essentially, in Alien on the ZX Spectrum, you control every member of the Nostromo's crew. Sans Kane, who decides to give birth. Kind of rude there, Mr. Kane. You could at least do that in private, sir. And so you have to try to avoid the xenomorph and eventually kill it, and you do so by controlling the crew in a variety of different ways. Now, this game is, well, kind of like a super primitive version of The Sims in some respects, because the crew members actually kind of have, well, not personalities, they kind of have moods, although they don't really change as far as I can tell. Essentially, they can get, like, panicky, but most of the time they're just okay and feel confident. That's good. You know, if I was facing a xenomorph with nothing more than a homemade flamethrower, I'd feel confident too, after about 6 shots of whiskey. But anyway, now eventually you can kill the xenomorph. The problem here is the game kind of subtly insults you after you do so. Now, other than the fact that Ash is an android, which we don't really care about, competency rating? You're gonna rate my competence? Fuck you! 80%! Go to hell, you fucking tape player game on... Yeah. The game actually controls fairly well, and unlike with some other ZX Spectrum games, you can actually bind the keys, which is really good because, well, let's face it, classic computing had some very strange key bindings, to say the least. It's a game that works. It's not really fun by modern standards, but at the time this would have actually seemed pretty cool. And when you think about it, from an abstract level, an Alien game that lets you basically act out the events of Alien is pretty bloody cool, and one of the game lets you control the various crew members of the Nostromo. So really, what is there to say about Alien on the ZX Spectrum? Well, it controls decently enough, the gameplay isn't really addicting or engrossing anyway, but at the very least, it makes for a interesting intellectual exercise. Now, would I recommend it? Well, if you're a Speccy aficionado, yeah, you might check it out. If you grew up with games like this, you might enjoy it. But if you were like me and grew up long after this, well, you might want to steer clear. It's not the worst Alien game ever made, but it's certainly the most visually unappealing, to say the least. And with that, this is General Lotz, signing off.